Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. We've got this collection of recent reports to try to give us a good picture of all these kind of critical things happening.
Totally. We're talking like global demand for soybeans squeezing the local edible oil market, the government pushing these digital quality standards, and businesses are really pushing back. And we got to figure out, like, what's the deal with the prime minister saying all this, optimistic stuff about growth, especially with poverty going up and all these huge subsidy programs.
For sure. And it's not just the economics of it all, right? We got to look at Tigray. The peace is so fragile, could really impact the whole region. We'll also look into how the government's, sort of dipping their toes into opening up the logistics sector. And then there's this really crucial stuff happening with kidney disease treatment. But also there are these, really interesting things happening with investment banking. So much going on.
It's a lot to cover, but we're going to try to give you this overview that makes sense of all these changes happening in Ethiopia right now. Let's start with something that's super basic, right? Edible oil. It sounds like that whole industry is in a real tough spot.
Yeah, the reports are they're painting a pretty worrying picture. It seems like all these plants around Addis Ababa are shutting down, and it all comes back to soybeans. The price has gone crazy, up 70% in just 2 months. 8,500 birr a quintal, which for people who don't know is 100 kilos. And I mean, this is having a huge ripple effect.
Yeah, and this price jump, it's all tied to global demand, right? They want our raw soybeans and even the oilseed cake that's left over. China, Kenya, they're buying it all up. I mean, these soybeans are flying out of Ethiopia, sometimes even before the local guys can get their hands on them. So it's how do you balance making money from exports with supporting your own industries,
That's exactly the problem. The Ethiopian Edible Oil Manufacturing Industries Association, they represent 60 companies. They're actually asking the government to put a pause on exporting raw soybeans. They're saying their members are getting hit hard. And you can see it too, right? At least 7 plants have shut down, workers laid off. Mohammed Yusuf, he's the chairman, he's been talking about it. It really shows how vulnerable these domestic businesses are when the global market goes wild.
And who pays the price in the end? Consumers, right? 5 liters of edible oil, it's 1,600 birr. And think about it. 1 quintal of soybeans, that only gives you 10 liters of oil. So those raw material prices, man, they hit everyone's wallets.
There's this one case really highlighted. This guy, Gene Lima, he's got this processing plant in Buryu, huge place. Can handle 400 quintals of soybeans a day.
Yeah.
But he's had to shut it all down. What's interesting, though, is he's still paying his 100 workers, waiting for things to calm down. I mean, that's how tough things are. These businesses are bleeding money, hoping they can get back on their feet.
Addis, he used to run the Ethiopian Oil Manufacturers Association. He's got this idea, focus on exporting processed oil, not raw beans. Makes sense, right? Our domestic manufacturing has grown like crazy. So the demand here is way up. Why ship out the raw stuff when we can process it here? It's a good question. Are we really thinking strategically about our export?
Right, and then you've got the government stance. Addis from the Ministry of Industry, he's basically saying, hey, we'd rather not export raw soybeans unless you're adding value, processing it first. But then they've got this minimum export price, $550 a ton. And globally, prices have tanked, down to $450. It doesn't really add up, Makes you wonder how effective that minimum price really is.
And then Mesfin Abebe from the MTRI, he's defending that higher price, saying it's because Ethiopian soybeans are organic and, the prices here are just higher. But that's not helping our exporters. They're exporting way less, and their revenue's down. The president of the Exporters Association, Addis, he's actually, frustrated because the banks aren't really supporting them. It all ties together. Pricing, finances, the whole system.
But then you look at the farmers themselves, right? And it's a different story. This guy, Getu Ayalu, he's in Amhara, a soybean farmer. His prices have gone from 3,000 to 8,000 birr a quintal. More land is being used for soybeans now. So the processors are hurting, but the farmers are doing pretty well, at least for now. It shows how complicated this all is. You make a policy, and it affects different people in different ways.
For sure. It's a total split. Farmers, good. Processors, bad. And this economist, Asef Atilon, he makes a really good point. The market's unpredictable, right? He's saying to really grow in the long run, we got to focus on processed exports. And he's also saying, hey, fertilizer, machinery, all that stuff, it's up 60%.
Yeah.
So even though farmers are getting more for their beans now, those costs are eating into their profits. It's a balancing act, isn't it?
I mean, it's a big question, right? Are we getting the most out of our economy by just shipping out these raw materials? Or should we be helping our own processing industry grow? More jobs, higher value products, all that. No easy answers. Just a lot of different people trying to make it work in a really, really tough situation.
Okay, let's move on. Let's talk about quality. The government's trying to standardize things. The Institute of Ethiopian Standards, they're rolling out this new digital system for marking products. Uliad Chala, he's explaining it. The goal is better quality, better traceability, and let's be honest, more money from fees.
It's pretty high tech, actually. They're going to be using like digital marks with data encoded in them. It's going to be mandatory for a lot of basic products. They're even working with the Ethiopian Artificial Intelligence Institute on this. So definitely moving towards using tech to like regulate things. And they're creating new certification categories too. Diamond, import, halal, green product, organic, trying to like separate the good stuff from the not so good stuff, you know.
Yeah, and they're serious about this. Like 70 million burr budget, hoping to make over 100 million a year from fees. Thousands of standards, hundreds of products all have to use this system. But here's where it gets tough. Those fees. They can be as high as 0.5% of a company's revenue, depending on what they make. And, well, businesses are not happy.
Not happy at all. The Ethiopian Beverages Association, they're saying this is going to be a huge burden. Companies are already struggling, right? But the loudest complaints are coming from, no surprise, the edible oil guys. Ethiopian Edible Oil Producers and Manufacturers Association. Mohammed Yusuf, he's basically saying, look, we can't afford to pay anything more. Taxes, unfair competition from imports that don't have to pay duties, prices skyrocketing, shortages, and, get this, 3 years ago, there were twice as many edible oil factories operating as there are now. They're getting squeezed from all sides.
And there's this example really shows you how bad it is. Abbey Edible Oil. They're in Bahir Dar. Big operation, employ a ton of people, but they've got security problems, power's always going out, and now these regulations are piling up. Their deputy manager is saying they're like this close to shutting down. So for a lot of companies, these fees could be the final nail in the coffin. It's a tough line to walk, trying to enforce quality without putting businesses under.
Right, and you've got this other group, the Ethiopian Conformity Assessment Enterprise. They're the ones testing products, making sure the bad stuff doesn't get out there. They've stopped a lot of bad products, shut down some manufacturers. But here's the thing. If they find out a company's lying about their certifications, they don't actually sue them. Kind of a weak spot, don't you think? If you can just lie and get away with it, the whole system breaks down.
And then you've got the Ethiopian Food and Drug Authority adding more requirements, like now edible oil has to be fortified, which, yeah, that's good for people's health, but it makes things more expensive and complicated for the companies making it. The guy in charge of quality at AgriFood, he's saying, yeah, we get it, testing's important, but can we at least make the standards clear and consistent? And they're also like private labs popping up, like Bless Food Laboratory. Shows you that people are starting to realize, hey, quality's important.
But there's this consultant, Michael Haleslassie. He's looking at the bigger picture. He's saying, look, we don't enforce the standards we already have. Consumers don't care about quality. They just want the cheapest stuff. And then you've got unfair competition. He's saying we need a total change in attitude, not just about making things right, but also about buying things right.
And Uliad Chala, the guy from the Institute of Ethiopian Standards, he's saying, hey, everyone's got to share the burden. It's this classic battle, isn't it? The government wants better quality, wants more money, but businesses are just trying to survive. Finding that sweet spot, that's going to be key for Ethiopia's economy to actually thrive.
Let's talk about the Prime Minister's report to Parliament. He was pretty optimistic about growth, talked about collecting 580 billion birr in revenue. Sounds good on the surface, right?
Yeah, at first glance you think, okay, things are looking up. But then he goes on to say, yeah, but all our expenses are really outweighing the money we're bringing in. And when you see how much of the government's spending on subsidies, it makes sense. Fertilizer, fuel, social safety net programs, medicine, even edible oil.
These subsidies are massive. Like 84 billion birr just for fertilizer. 72 billion for fuel. That's a lot of money. And the Prime Minister himself said that our tax to GDP ratio is really low, like under 7%, much lower than a lot of other countries. Makes you wonder, can we really keep up these subsidies?
Yeah, and fuel subsidies are like this whole other thing. Almost doubled recently. The plan is to get rid of them eventually. But Arega Shimete, he's an economist, he's saying, hold on, right now these subsidies are really only helping people in cities. Is that really the best way to use that money? It's complicated, designing your programs so that they actually help everyone.
And then you look at the budget cuts to education and health, like more than half their budget's gone. Arega Shimete calls it unstrategic. You can't help but think, what's that going to do to our future? What about people's health? It shows the tough choices governments have to make, right? Limited resources, Got to figure out where to spend them.
Yeah, and the government's trying to balance things out. They've raised salaries for public servants, especially the lowest earners. Good idea, right? People need relief. But that adds another, 91 billion birr to the government spending. And they're getting a loan from the World Bank to help cover it. Shows you they're trying different things to fix the economy, but they're relying more on loans.
And then you see the real impact of all this. Taija Zidane, she's a teacher. Makes 9,000 birrs a month. She can barely afford teff, cooking oil, onions. Everything's gotten so expensive. And she's got relocation expenses on top of that. It just shows you, even with a raise, if prices keep going up, it's not enough. Especially for the basics.
Exactly. And you've got these two very different perspectives. Prime Minister saying GDP is going to grow 8.4%. Sounds great. But then you have this MP, Desalegn Chain. He's pointing to the global multidimensional poverty index. 86 million Ethiopians are living in poverty. That's a huge number. And he's saying people's lives are getting worse. Which just makes you wonder, are those big economic numbers really reflecting what's happening to everyday people?
And the Prime Minister talked about all this foreign exchange revenue, exports, remittances, foreign investment. But imports are also high. So you got to look at the whole picture, right? And, Arega Shument reminds us not to just trust the official numbers. There have been problems with these kinds of assessments before. So you got to be careful.
And then there's the hunger. It's bad. Ethiopia is fourth in the world for acute hunger. Millions are struggling to get enough food, drought, floods, all the instability, conflict, the economy, less aid coming in. It's a recipe for disaster.
The government's spending a lot on fertilizer imports and subsidies. Billions of dollars. But a farmer, Badi Obermeji, he's had to cut his fertilizer use in half. Prices have doubled. So it seems like there are problems with how those subsidies are working. They're not getting to the people who need them. The State Minister for Agriculture, Sophia Casa, she's admitted that fertilizer subsidies have gone up 253%. But on the ground, it's a different story.
This MP, Abeba Desalegn, he's saying the government's not managing the subsidies well, leading to shortages, like fuel. And he's also saying the raises people got, they're just not enough to keep up with inflation. So yeah, the Prime Minister's talking about progress, but for a lot of Ethiopians, it's getting harder and harder to make ends meet.
So things are not looking great in Tigray. Getachew Reda, he's the head of the interim administration there, he's saying some groups within the TPLF and their military wing, the TDF, are working with Eritrea to start fighting again. Pretty serious stuff. Could really blow up the peace deal.
Yeah, a lot of countries are worried. The EU, too. Everyone's saying, calm down, stick to the agreement. Shows you how fragile things are. One wrong move, and it could all fall apart.
And there's this whole power struggle happening within the TPLF itself. Getachew Reda's group versus the guys with Debretsion Gebremichael. They don't agree on how to carry out the peace agreement.
Yeah.
It's gotten so bad that Getachew Reda and his deputy have basically left their offices. This internal fighting is a huge threat to peace.
And then you've got Prime Minister Abiy. He keeps talking about getting access to the sea for Ethiopia. We lost that when Eritrea became independent. A lot of people think that would be a game changer for the economy. Easier trade, lower transportation costs.
But that's a really touchy subject with Eritrea, right? Their coastline is right there, practically next door. If Ethiopia makes a move, even if it's just talking, Eritrea could see it as a threat, and we could end up back at war in a place that's already seen way too much fighting.
There's already so much tension. Ethiopia is accusing Eritrea of messing with the peace process. Eritrea doesn't trust Ethiopia getting close to the UAE, worried about those sea ambitions. And now Eritrea is involved in the Sudan conflict, supposedly backing one side against groups linked to the TDF. It's a mess.
And this is the Horn of Africa, right? Conflicts tend to, spread. It's like a brush fire. In neighboring countries, global powers, everyone's got their interests. Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Turkey, the U.S., UK, EU, all involved. And, since the war in Ukraine started, the world's focus has shifted. Maybe that gives some of these regional leaders the idea that they can get away with more, which is dangerous.
The big fear is that Ethiopia will get dragged into this TPLF infighting. That would give Eritrea an opening, and the whole thing could explode. The Pretoria Accord would be finished. Ethiopia's got to stay out of it. Holding elections in Tigray, helping the displaced people, getting all the fighters demobilized. That's how you stop things from going bad. And, there are reports that Eritrean troops are still in Tigray, even though the peace agreement said they had to leave. That's not a good sign.
And we can't forget what happened last time. Hundreds of thousands dead, millions displaced. Reconstruction's going to cost $20 billion. And there's already fighting in Amhara and Oromia. It's a lot. The World Bank did this study, really interesting. They say preventing conflict is way cheaper than dealing with war and rebuilding. like investing in diplomacy, good governance. That could save $2.5 billion a year. And more importantly, it saves lives.
You can't put a price on that. Even small investments in peace can have a huge impact in the long run. Prime Minister Abiy has said Ethiopia doesn't want to invade Eritrea, which is a good thing. But the international community needs to stay involved. Diplomacy is the key here. If we want peace in the Horn of Africa, we gotta work for it.
So the logistics sector is opening up a little. Multimodal operations are now allowed. Basically, the government's trying to make things more efficient. We're not doing so great in the World Bank's Logistics Performance Index. Lots of room for improvement.
Djibouti's been in control for a long time. They handle almost all of Ethiopia's imports. Multimodal logistics, it's using different types of transport together, like ships, trains, trucks. Yelu Tesfaye from the Ethiopian Maritime Authority explained it. Make things smoother, faster. The problem is Ethiopian Shipping and Logistics, ESLSE, they're state-owned, and they've had a total monopoly. Now 6 new companies can operate, but...
There's a big but. The really important markets, China and the UAE, and all the bulk cargo like fertilizer, big machinery, that's all still ESLSE territory.
Yeah.
Yelu Tesfaye basically said it. The state-owned enterprise has to be protected. So it's not really a free-for-all.
And the new guys have to jump through hoops, too. Big terminals, lots of trucks, huge warehouses. Even the CEO of ESLSE, Bariso Amalo, he's not exactly thrilled about renting out space to competitors, but he's also saying maybe competition will force them to improve.
6 companies got in. Cosmos Multimodal, Tikura Ave Transport, Pan-Africa Global, Ethio-Djibouti Railway, Ethio-Rail Logistics, and Gulf Ingot. Sounds like a lot, but this guy, Daniel Zamichael, he's been in the industry forever. He's from Traders International. He's saying, yeah, but the market's limited. China, UAE, bulk cargo, that's all off limits. Maybe only 20% is actually open for competition. And ESLSE, they control 80% of trade. They've got a fleet of 11 ships, and they're making a killing. It's going to be tough to compete with that.
Ethio Rail Logistics, they're a joint venture with the Ethiopian Railway Corporation. They're saying, okay, we'll work with ESLSE, even charter ships from them. But they're not happy about being shut out of the big stuff. Gesha Hale, the CEO, he's like, if this is a liberalized market, let us compete for everything. It's just frustrating, right? You think you're getting a chance, then they tell you, oh, but not for this part.
Cosmos Multimodal, same thing. They built this huge dry port ready to go, and now they're finding out they can't access all the markets. Their CEO, Gitu Hunduma, he's disappointed. There's this gap, right, between what investors expected and what's actually happening.
Gulf Ingot, they're being a little smarter, I guess. They're going to work with international shipping lines and the railway. Their chairman, Yitbrek Sudi, he's saying they see opportunities in the areas that are open. So some companies are adapting, trying to find a way.
An expert, Matthias Nsermu, he's cautiously optimistic. He's saying, look, the banking sector opened up gradually too, but he also agrees that these restrictions are a problem. If we want this to work, everyone needs a fair shot. Right now, it's a baby step, and the government's still holding on tight.
Okay, so this is tough to talk about, but we have to. The reports we've seen about kidney disease treatment, it's heartbreaking. Tukur and Besa Teaching Hospital, they're focusing on these young kids, like Belina Asnake, she's 10, and Will Alamaihu, he's only 5. They both need dialysis, but there just isn't enough access. It's a terrible situation.
It's a crisis. Dr. Handsome Takizios, he's a kidney specialist at Tukur and Besa. He's saying up to 3 kids die every month there because they can't get dialysis. And more kids are needing emergency dialysis now. And here's the awful truth. People don't donate as much for kids with kidney failure because they think they won't make it. It's just so sad.
Kidney failure in kids, a lot of times it's genetic or they're born with problems. And the bad economy is making everything worse. Medical supplies, treatments, they all have to be imported, and it's so expensive. Dialysis in private centers can be 3,000 to 6,000 birrs every time. And meds, like blood thinners, the price has gone up 5 times. Most families can't afford any of this.
Visvit Akasias from the Tesfa Kidney Patients Association. He told a story. This kid who died waiting for dialysis. They were trying to get him a transplant, but it was too late. It just shows you how broken the system is. We have this new law about organ donation, but nobody knows about it.
Right.
And it's hard to find matches within families.
And it's not just kids. Adults are suffering too. This guy, Isaias Walda, he's 24. He has to wait longer between dialysis sessions because he can't afford it. And it's making him really sick. People shouldn't have to choose between going broke and getting the treatment they need to live.
Dr. Wangoltina from Jimmy University, she's saying this kind of on-again, off-again dialysis is dangerous. And she's stressing that we need to focus on preventing kidney disease, especially for people with diabetes and high blood pressure. Those are the big risk factors. And the numbers are scary. Only about 11,132 people got dialysis last year. That's way lower than in other countries. It all comes down to cost. Dialysis is expensive everywhere, but here it can cost more than what most people make in a year.
And there are hardly any kidney specialists. Most of them are in Addis. So it's hard to even get diagnosed, let alone treated. Addis, the guy we talked about, he actually had to move to find more affordable treatment. It's a reminder that where you live makes a huge difference in how good your healthcare is.
Dr. Ewan Wiesen Tadesse from Chikuranbisa, he's saying kidney disease is on the rise because of these lifestyle diseases like hypertension and diabetes. And also, we're getting better at diagnosing it, but we're not getting better at treating it. The number of dialysis patients is going up, but it's still way too low. That means a lot of people who need treatment aren't getting it.
The Ministry of Health says we don't have enough dialysis centers, public or private. Transplants are a better solution in the long run, but they're not easy either. We do some transplants here, but a lot of people go abroad for them. The problem is it's hard to get the medicine you need after a transplant, and the cost of going abroad has doubled because of the exchange rate. It's out of reach for most people.
Biniam Abera from the Ethiopian Kidney Transplant Association, he's worried because there aren't enough meds after a transplant. And Dr. Ashanafi Tazbu from the Blood and Tissue Bank Service, he's hopeful that the new donation laws will help, but he says we need to do a better job of getting organs, and we need a way to help people pay for these treatments.
St. Paul's Hospital, they do a lot of transplants, but they're struggling. They can't get the supplies they need, and the prices are crazy. It's limiting how many transplants they can do. They used to do a lot more. The cost of everything has doubled. It just shows you how hard it is to get the resources you need to provide health care. Solomon Nagus from the Ethiopian Pharmaceutical Supply Services, he knows about the supply problems, and he's saying they're trying to lock in longer contracts. But the prices keep changing.
And even the companies importing medical equipment, they're having problems. Yedidja Saleshi, he's an importer. He's saying the customs duties are killing them. Prices are sky high. It makes it even harder to get the equipment we need to improve healthcare. At the end of the day, you look at these kids, Belena and Lul and their families, and you see how desperate things are. We need to do more for kidney patients in Ethiopia.
So let's end on a positive note. Investment banking is coming to Ethiopia, finally. Wiegand Capital Investment Bank, they're the first. And they've got this amazing banker running the show, Grootwit de Wit.
It's a big deal. Aklilu Wubet, he's the president of Wiegand Bank. He's saying this new bank can really shake things up in the capital market. They're going to do feasibility studies, advise companies, help them get on the Ethiopian Securities Exchange. Wiegand Bank, they're actually the only company listed on the ESX right now, so this could be a big boost for local investment.
Rudy Dawit, she's incredible, been in finance forever. She helped start the Bank of Abyssinia, was the president of Owebedian and Zeeman banks. She's got all the experience in the world. Plus, she studied in the U.S. She's a real pioneer, especially for women in finance.
Wiegand Capital, they're starting with a lot of capital, mostly from Wiegand Bank. First, they're focusing on advice and brokerage. But they're going to expand into asset management, wealth management, all that. They're even bringing in people from overseas because this kind of investment banking, it's new here. Mahan Tehelku, she's the Director General of the Ethiopian Capital Market Authority. She's really excited about Budawit and all the other women who are stepping up to lead in finance.
So there are actually 5 new capital market companies: CBE SC Capital Investment Bank, Ethio Fidelity, Equation Security Advisor, and HST Investment Advisors. The ECMA, they're being really strict about who gets licensed, and they're going to be checking up on these companies every quarter to make sure everything's above board.
Well, Governor of the National Bank of Ethiopia, Mamo Miritu, he's saying this is a huge step. Ethiopia needs to rely less on foreign capital, and these banks can help with that. He also mentioned that they're going to start issuing government bonds, more options for investors. CDE SC Capital Investment Bank, they're backed by Commercial Bank of Ethiopia, and Zemedena Negatu. He's the guy in charge. They're going all out. Brokerage, underwriting, advising on mergers and acquisitions. They want to grow fast. They're also expecting a lot of investment from Ethiopians living abroad.
HST Investment Advisors, they've got more capital than they even needed to start. Tudaj Gezaheng is the CEO. They're all about educating the public about this new market. And then there's Ethio Fidelity Securities. They're the first securities dealer in Ethiopia. Their CEO is Desalegn Wendale, and the chairman's Ababa Zudu, he's a big name, started a bunch of banks. They're saying we need to get more companies listed, especially for manufacturing and commerce. And they're stressing that we need to train people up fast, get them ready for this new world.
The ECMA is planning to give out more licenses. They think this market can really grow. We've got all these banks, insurance companies, microfinance institutions, and more people are investing. But Dr. Takedo Alamu from Addis Ababa University, he's a bit cautious. He's saying, look, are these companies really ready to go public? They've got to get their finances in order, their governance. It takes time. And he's also worried about relying on foreign experts too much. He likes that they're starting a digital academy to train Ethiopians.
So for Brudewit DeWitt running this new bank, it's a huge honor. She's making history. And it's a chance to really shape the future of finance in Ethiopia.
That's it for today.
Thanks for listening.
See you next time.